with our last pay practitioners panel of 2023, and actually the last episode of this group of awesome pay practitioners today. So if you're just joining us for the first time, we'll be doing this again next year. But what we like to do is, we're a group of compensation practitioners and consultants that get together every other week and have an unrehearsed, unscripted, casual but professional conversation around different topics in compensation. Today, I'm really excited about this particular one because I think there's a lot of things that are changing. I think that people are reconsidering our topic today, which is, are merit increases still relevant? So before we get started, I like to do a quick round of introductions in case it's your first time with us. I'll go first, and we'll just go in a clockwise order. I'm Justin Hampton. I'm the founder of CompTool. I was a compensation practitioner at companies like Starbucks and Greyhound and Primera Blue Cross for about 15 years before jumping over into the software side of helping compensation practitioners. So lots of experience, and happy to be joined today by everyone here. Nancy, how about you?
Hi, thanks so much, Justin. So I'm Nancy Romanishin. I work at Syndio. We're a workplace equity analytics platform helping companies pay folks fairly and enable opportunities in a fair and equitable manner. And I have about 30 years of compensation experience, both in-house as a comp manager many, many years ago, and then many years with Willis Towers Watson as a broad-based compensation consultant. So excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm Sherry Nornis, and I'm with Morgan HR. And the majority of my career has been as a practitioner, working in companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Emerson Electric, and now I get to do the consulting gig, which is awesome. And yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
All right. And Catherine.
Hi, Catherine Dovey, Sound Compensation. We do compensation consulting for emerging companies and mid-tier companies. Been doing this for a long time. Really thrilled to get to have this conversation. And anyway, thanks for the invitation to join you.
Sure. All right. And Greg.
Yeah, Greg Roche, VP of Compensation for United Health Group. I cover our healthcare delivery businesses. My team provides the general comp support for those businesses, and been doing comp and benefits for around 15 years.
All right, and Jennifer.
Yep, Jennifer Hasrick with Korn Ferry. Been in the comp space and business management space for over 20 years. I've always been a consultant in some shape or form, primarily focused on broad-based compensation and pay equity. So building systems and testing them.
Well, fantastic. Well, all right. Well, I think this will be a fun conversation. So let's just jump into it now. I will kind of address the first question, which is, our merit increases today still relevant? And my personal belief is, yes, they're still relevant, but I think we need to be much more mindful with how we're addressing and providing those merit increases. And I think there's always been that conversation around, you don't want to peanut butter merit increases, which it means essentially just give everybody 3% or 4%. I think that merit increases are still relevant, but I think we have to reevaluate how they're being done. I think that, those average performers or your steady performers, maybe sometimes those are the folks that don't get a merit increase. So I think that the merit increases are still relevant if you make them dramatic enough, which I think is going to be a hard conversation and controversial, but that's my personal opinion. I think it's going to be hard to convince some companies, but we'll go through that today in the conversation. So anybody else have thoughts? Do we think that the merit increases are still relevant? I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts.
So I wanted to start today. I know we're laughing so I have very strong opinions about, say, the merit matrix, which is typically what we use to allocate merit increases each year. And I thought, because it's the holiday season, I would come up with an analogy. So I think of the merit matrix, it's like fruitcake. It's traditional for the holiday season. Some people eat it, but nobody really likes it. But it's like it's the go-to sort of thing, right, that we have. And I just feel like that's what, I think compensation practitioners need to think more creatively around what is it that we're trying to accomplish with.
Mhm.
So merit has come out of an annual budget review, right? We will propose, say, the merit increase budget around the time that we're doing all of budget planning for an operation. So really, to me, merit increase is really more of like a budget allocation tool, and it's imperfect. And I think part of it is because we're trying to manage increases across a population of people who have had different historical compensation decisions made,
Mhm.
and we're trying to sort of correct for those, right? And then we're also trying to reward performance. And then we're also trying to respond to the market. And we're also embedding pay equity in that. So it's,
Yeah.
there's so much nuance. So I think, of course, it doesn't work. It's, that matrix worked many years ago. And I think we just have to, just like fruitcake, maybe we let it go. Maybe we don't bring it. And maybe there's a new way of thinking around the merit increase and it becomes about something else. And I think that also gets to the definitions of what is it that we're looking to accomplish, even with base salary. So,
Yeah.
but so that so that was my analogy that I wanted to share.
I like it.
I did not expect fruitcake on
Yeah,
that.
that was.
I did not think that's where that was going, but it's good. I like it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Not fruitcake. The analogy. The analogy is good.
Right? Because nobody likes fruitcake, Greg.
Right. Well,
I've never
yeah,
said it.
I guess.
I've avoided. I mean, Nancy, I think I agree that like the way of the world, partly because of transparency, has changed, right? There's more conversations, but I think there still needs to be some guideline for managers so there's not full discretion. And what is the answer to that, right? And I know I've seen very complicated systems. I think keeping it simple is where the direction we need to go so that you can explain it. Because how many times have we been in or working with organizations that can't even explain how they got to that with this, because there's this very complicated formula. So I think we need to just take that step back, like you said, like what are we trying to accomplish here? And how are we going to get there? And it's not the peanut butter spread, but there still needs to be a framework to work within to avoid other issues that we've talked about over the fall, as well.
I love that. A framework so that you can explain pay is the key. And then it's really being very simple, succinct, direct about what is it that we value.
Mhm.
And that's where I think when we think about the components of pay, that's where I think about the definitions around what is base pay meant to do at our company? What are bonuses meant to do at our company? What are long-term incentives meant to do?
Mhm.
And I think that's where there's been so much confusion because we've seen the merit matrix at the time of an annual increase cycle as the answer for all of these different things. And it's not the best tool. So it's more of a sort of a breaking apart and a rethink.
Yeah.
And there's more awareness that people can talk about that now than they ever used to. That's what's really cool.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. And one of I also, Nancy, am completely with you as far as merit matrix. I do not like them. I think they're all they do is replicate bad decisions that have occurred in the past, previous decisions that we've made, and inequities that have been created accidentally along the way are just replicated. And so many times, the performance ratings, if they're tied to that merit matrix, they just get completely corrupted because the manager feels somebody, isn't paid in the proper arena or proper area. So they just come up with a rating that aligns with the number that they want. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done better first of all, I really hate the merit matrix, the static ones that are just completely, you know, if it's this, it's that. At least use some algebra and figure out, you know, what your performance array looks like, and then come up with the number, because it's just a hot mess when you do it the reverse. I also feel like we really need to put some energy into using pay placement tools. Really robust pay placement tools can be used in place of the merit matrix entirely. And that's what I've been leaning toward lately. I have a client right now. We just launched this big project. We're right now struggling with them, like trying to figure out how are they've committed to never attaching pay to performance inside the organization. And now we're trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? You've said you're going to not do this anymore. So what direction do we go? It's challenging. There's lots of decisions to be made. And I think part of it is, our culture really values pay for performance. I had one CEO tell me a couple years ago, well, there is no other way to go. I mean, it's only pay for performance. Is there something else in the world? And I'm like, good question. You know?
It's funny, the performance question we get a lot, because when you do pay equity analysis, people think they equate performance measurement with performance rating.
Mhm.
And in a pay equity analysis, performance rating doesn't come up as driving pay very much, but intuitively. So a lot of times we have to intuitively kind of explain, well, think about it. You're using it as in the context of a merit matrix. How much do you really differentiate based on a rating? And right. So what does your base salary reflect? It reflects the nature of the role, its impact internally, the market. Like, that's what you're paying most for. And you'll see that in a pay equity analysis. So then it goes to, though, Catherine, then it becomes exactly the conversation you just described. Well, wait a minute. We have to report this out to leadership. Our executives are going to be like, what do you mean you're not controlling for performance? What does that mean? And I often describe it as, well, you pay for a threshold of performance. If somebody's not a good performer, if they're not completing the tasks of the job, they're out. You know, they're on a performance improvement plan. So those are the types of things that we see playing out when you know, you have those conversations. So I think, Catherine, you're raising some key issues about different techniques and ways that we can manage pay, you know, to accommodate sort of all of those different comp philosophies, those elements of your comp philosophy.
Yeah, and you know, I agree. I think it's the over engineering of that merit matrix. I don't know how many times I've been in a leadership conversation and they're like, well, they're going to be an 8 or a 3.2, and this one's a 3.3. And I'm like,
oh my God. It makes no difference.
No, it doesn't. So I'll use my analogy, and it doesn't have to do with the holidays, but you know, when it comes to looking at performance and merit, I just have 3 buckets. It's real simple. You are either chasing the boat, you're in the boat, solidly doing all the work in the boat, or you're designing the next boat. It's not that hard. So you've got your performance, and then you need to go back and look at all the things that you mentioned, Nancy. Supply and demand in the market. What are we paying for this job? All these other components that fit into that. Plus, you know, the variable comps and all of that. So I think we have to lean in a little bit to our leaders and help them have those conversations, because that's where they're getting tripped up on. They're like, how can I defend this to my people? You know, and my always question was, well, how are you going to defend a 3.2 versus a 3.3? What does that even mean? Right. So I think we have to lean in a little bit and help them on the performance side. And I think the merit piece will work itself out, but we've really got to give them the skills to be able to have that conversation about how people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay with it.
Yeah. Well, I think we've the over engineering is because we, either as comp people or HR people or the business, don't equip our managers to talk about pay. And so we give them these tools that say, like, you don't have to think about this, just follow this, which makes it so administratively it follows what we want to have happen, but it also gives the managers a way to say, look, I followed what they gave me. I can't really do anything about your pay. Here's what they said it's supposed to be. And I'm sorry, I would love to give you more, but this matrix says I can only guess. And so it's how you switch that around to really help them think about all pay decisions throughout the year. And, merit should be no different than how we think different pay decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting too. So when we think about the merit matrix, it's designed to allocate limited funds to higher performers. But there's a bit of a disconnect. And I think, Catherine, you were alluding to this, but there's a disconnect between that and your compensation philosophy. If you have someone that is an extremely high performer, but low in that range, you could be at the top of that merit matrix, but it's not necessarily going to get them to where they should be in your range based upon your compensation philosophy. So I think, it's interesting to, when we drill down and think about, to your point, Nancy, like, do the merit matrices still solve that problem? Catherine, is a range penetration tool more useful in some cases to driving kind of the business? Because at 3.2 and that 3.3%, it makes no difference when you divide it 26 times or 24 times or 52 times for an employee when it's, increments, very small increases. I mean, even when I've seen some increases when you take someone with a $50,000 annual rate, and then someone gets a 3% increase, someone gets a 6% increase. We're only talking about $1,500 over the course of 26 pay periods, and that's per day. That's about one drive-through meal per day more for a high performer. It just doesn't drive the that you want.
Well, I think a lot of times we have finance is so in the mix of this that they because they make in organizations that I work with, many times the finance team comes up with what the number is going to be for the year without taking into consideration the fact that we maybe have a lot of really new hires. We have a completely new team, and it takes 8 to 10 years for somebody to move from the minimum to the midpoint of the range, right? If you get 3% per year and the pay bands continue to move and so on, it's a nightmare. So we have to get away from this. This is just I'm not saying getting away from merit increases, or I would say annual, not getting away from annual adjustments, certainly, but getting away from these really stodgy old merit matrix type things that really don't serve anybody. And it's just an exercise in futility and frustration for everybody.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite terms, actually, Catherine, an exercise in futility. So not to encounter
it.
No, but that's a great term. No, but I think it goes to, again, it's something you were talking about, Jennifer, in terms of being able to explain what it is that you're doing, right? And I think in some ways, right, pay transparency can be our friend because it's testing for us. How does it sound when like Sherry, like you're saying, how does it sound when I say you get a 3.25, you get a 3.5, woohoo? This really doesn't have a lot of meaning. And then it begs the question, well, where is it appropriate to have manager discretion for pay decisions and where is it not? I think in light of pay transparency, we're seeing a lot of that teed up as a question. So like you're saying, Greg, we have to do a better job of equipping people who are actually making the pay decisions with the knowledge, they need to make an informed decision. But it also begs the question, if we're thinking about how we're managing our salary budgets, how we're managing pay, what are the messages we want employees to internalize about that as well? So I feel strongly that I think where things are headed with pay transparency, we would be better served saying your base salary represents the value of that job to the company and the way it's valued in the market. And we bring that information together, and this is what the job pays, period. We will increase that as needed as we see the market move, as the impact of the work may change for us as an organization as our business moves, but that's what we're going to do with base salary. Performance, your performance, specific behaviors that we can point to and say what it is, that's where we're going to use cash. Those are cash incentives and other forms of rewards, whether it's recognition, whatever it is, that we're going to use to reward performance. But I really would love to see a separation of the two. And I think pay transparency is going to force that. Because now you're going to have employees saying, well, tell me, what exactly is different about Nancy's performance than, mine, that she gets that 3.5 and I get the 3.25, and like, what's markedly different? Show me, And so I think we're going to see more of that. And I think I think that's just going to be a difficult nuance to explain or ask a manager to explain.
I like Sherry's analogy of the rowing the boat or building the boat. You can't have you can't have a company of everyone building boats either. Right. And that's the reality partly of that critical conversation that we need to, give that reality check. Like we really can't have a company in that, in that way. We certainly want to get the people that aren't rowing the boat off. Right. And have that conversation because, unless we can teach them how to do it better. But, we all know that sometimes may not be the right one for them. So I think that part of the transparency is also not, I think the pressure on training development, certainly for managers, becomes even more critical, but simplifying the message so they can explain it. Because again, comp is complicated, right? We have it in our heads, we understand all of it, but not everyone does. So boiling it down as simple as we can, but that calibration, I think, is very, very much a part of this merit conversation as well.
Yeah.
It's revisiting that conversation again with leaders. It's getting them more engaged in how it looks. I mean, I don't know how many of you have trained leaders on what comp is. It doesn't look like that today.
Right.
That's not the tool they need. They don't need to know necessarily what position and range is or comp ratio. They need to understand the value of that job, how to have a fruitful conversation with the employee to engage them in their comp. So we can't just strip away that word merit increase. I mean, I worked with one company, we called it an annual pay review. We were a global company, and sometimes the nature of that business in that particular country said everybody's going to get 2%. Well, that's not a merit increase. So we just pulled that word out altogether and just really started to look at the business, the conditions that we're dealing with in those countries, the different countries, and kind of starting to normalize, this is your pay for the job.
Sherry, I love that. I think it's business literacy is kind of what I was thinking of when you were talking to Jennifer. I think, and we're dealing with an employee population who's really well versed in that. I mean, these are smart folks. They have a lot of information at their fingertips now. So explaining, like you're saying, Jennifer, about this is how we value different jobs in our business. Yes, our client-facing roles are going to be paid a premium, or the roles that are actually creating the thing that we sell, or the people that are selling that thing, they're going to have a different deal than the folks that are maybe helping keep the operation going, supporting the operation. And this is how we make those distinctions. I think it's okay to say that because now employees are inside baseball. They know what all sorts of jobs pay. And I think one of the thing I know for me as a comp professional, I had to sort of remember that because I've been desensitized to it over the years. And I think for a lot of other folks, oh, this is new information. Wow, I didn't know that job pays that. Or they were UPS. They had the UPS driver. I think his video went viral because he broke down his paycheck, and people were like, "Whoa, wait, a driver? That's what they make?" Yes, that's what they make. So I think, it was enlightening for a lot of people. So I think a lot of employees are going to go through that, and that makes them ready for us to have an adult conversation about this is how we run the business. This is how this means. And like you're saying, Sherry, in different countries, these are the different allowances that exist, the different practices that exist. And so this is how it fits in our comp philosophy.
Yep. We got to start managing expectations, right? What are the expectations? Change the narrative. So
I'm really curious about something. Does anybody here, do you ever see businesses link the size of the merit budget to their overall profitability for the year? Have you ever seen, or is it just always tied to whatever the average movement for the labor market is?
I would say in tech industry, it is common to be more mindful of how you're doing as a tech company and the size of, say, a merit increase. But to your point, Catherine, most of the, I would say, general industry tends to be more around, I call it sort of the, what's everybody else doing?
And,
Sort of
the budget is. Yep.
yeah, that's what becomes the budget, less about business performance. But to your point, and I think that's something that probably it should change, right?
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm super conservative about pay because it's annuitized, right? And now we have a new watermark every year that we have to be able to hit. And when there's a downturn, that can create challenges. Then we have to do layoffs. And although organizations don't seem to be uncomfortable doing layoffs so much as they used to be, but I do think there's an opportunity for an annual incentive to be able to really drive, when business results are really good. But what we've seen over the years is corporate profits are going up, labor market is not going up. And so as we've had this really flat merit tool, these merit adjustments, as profits continue to go up, it feels to me like maybe looking at something where the employees have a little bit of share in that might be an opportunity for us to explore. At least it's kind of a radical conversation, I know. But I feel
we're
like
ready for it.
Yeah, I feel like it's time for us to start thinking outside the box.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of to go back to a couple of the points that have been made. I mean, we've been talking about salary transparent, more data, and employees having more data and bringing that data. They can go look at job postings with ranges. They can get all this stuff. I don't actually think that makes them better to talk about these conversations. I feel like, they have more information, but that doesn't mean they have better information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's very easy to cherry pick your sources when you come in and say like, oh, well, here's what somebody else is getting paid. That's what I should get paid. So it just makes it, maybe it is an adult conversation, but both parties have to be adults, meaning, either the comp or the manager has to be an adult. And so is the employee, to be honest, because when you actually explain it and go, here's the thing, most employees go, well, that didn't purpose, so I don't like the outcome of that conversation. Yeah. So it's a challenge. I mean, it's the way people are, but I think it's tough because they do have stuff to be like, well, I can go here and make more. And honestly, you have to say, go there and make more than yes, right? I mean, you're here basically trying to negotiate with me using this data, saying that you could go somewhere, give it a shot. If you can, congratulations. If not, we'd love to keep you around, or if it doesn't work out, come back. But that's the actual conversation that most times managers need to have, and they don't, because they're like, I can't have this vacancy on my team, and they just perpetuate this issue with people complaining about their pay and not being happy.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. I think it's when I've talked with different leaders and comp teams about how they're handling it, one person was telling me how they encourage folks to have sort of a humble conversation. Don't immediately be defensive when you're getting that challenge from the employee. Invite them to explain where they're getting their information, what are the references they're using, and then open up the conversation to say, great, okay, well, let me help. I'm going to help you understand where we're coming from. Here's how we define market. Here's how we define movement. Here are the parameters, and this is our program. Or if they're not comfortable having that, then it becomes great. Totally hear you. Let's make an appointment with Greg. We're going to have a meeting. Let's talk this through. and help, so you can better understand sort of where we're coming from and why we pay what we pay. So I think I agree, it's challenging, it's difficult, but it's also not meant to, well, we don't just roll over based on, the information you're bringing me, because I know the information you're bringing me, you don't have the full picture. So how can I help you see the broader picture and even put our business and our business goals sort of in the context of that?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you want rewards. I mean, the chat has been, everybody's comments that's watching, it's been awesome. So I love all the different conversations that are going on. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think somebody here was saying it has to be rewarding, right? I mean, it's called rewards. So we want it to be motivating. We want you to feel that you're paid fairly and competitively and you're valued. And so how can we have a dialogue that helps you internalize those messages? And I do think it's now it's just going to be more of a back and forth. Comp doesn't just happen to you anymore. You have a seat now, right? As an employee, able to bring some information into the conversation. So that's great. Let's engage. Let's use it as an engagement strategy.
I think that, oh, go ahead, Sherry.
Oh, I was just going to say something quick. It kind of goes back to that pay equity panel we had, which was, quite interesting. Because what do you want a 4% increase, or do you want to be paid competitively? Which one do you want? I mean, just laying that out there, 9%, I would think people would want to be paid competitively. Well, maybe that means a 20% increase, or maybe it means no increase at all.
Yeah.
Well,
And
it
going,
only say it's a 20. That's cool if it's
No,
the 20.
that's right. You're
It's
correct.
0,
Yes,
right?
for sure.
yeah. Well, and going back to what Nancy was talking about and what Greg mentioned, where people are cherry picking data. I mean, that's all about, we have a process internally. This is our process. These are the survey sources we use. I will look at the survey sources you bring to me because we're always open to updating and changing and improving our process, but we're not going to change the process to accommodate your specific niche, your specific role in most cases. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't a reason to make an exception to that, but I think being really clear about the fact that we have a process, this is our process, everybody's treated the same in this organization. We have process equity in this organization along with the other equity components. I think that, and then if they say, you know what, I don't like that, okay, fine, fair. But at least for the most part, I think people want to feel like they're being treated fairly. And if they understand that everybody else is living with the same rules, it's an easier sell, I think, than just saying, sorry, we're not going to take a look at that or whatever.
And I wonder if, as we talk about the process, I wonder if we start the process incorrectly. Because in most of the organizations I have been with, what we have done to define what our budget for the year is we've waited to see what everybody else is doing. And I don't know that really matters a lot of times. It doesn't really matter to me that on average, it's a 4% increase when we're 10% below the market rates, because we're never going to catch up. So I think having, a different approach to deciding, it's good information what other people are doing, but it's not relevant to what we need to do to pay competitively and fairly, because oftentimes you might, especially specific departments, might need more budget here than another department, or your organization might have, I think to someone's earlier point, a lot of more junior folks. And so I think coming back at that, when you give yourself this budget that's not reflective of your actual needs, that you're going to continue to have that problem where you're not going to be able to create these big increases that might be necessary for those high performers, those people that are far below. And
yeah. And to your point, Justin, I think, you have some departments with Larry, Curly, and Mo, and some departments with Einstein and his team, right? And we all get 3% or 3.3, whatever. It's completely, it's completely wrong-headed as far as trying to drive business results and trying to motivate and engage employees.
Yeah, Justin, it's so wise just what you said. I agree, Catherine, right? It's just, I feel like we've over indexed on that exactly, what everybody else is doing, what is the industry doing, and we're focusing on the wrong thing.
Mhm.
Even when we think about the way comp decisions are made, we focus so much energy on the annual review cycle, and when really, the action is really happening all year round with retention bonuses and market adjustments and
Yeah.
pay equity adjustments and all of these different things, new hire, promotion. That's where it's all happening. So keeping an eye on that, trying to monitor that, and that's what a lot of our customers, they focus a lot of energy around that because they're realizing that's what's creating sort of this unevenness that then once a year we're trying to attack with our fruitcake of a merit matrix. And again, and apologies to anybody who sincerely loves fruitcake. I mean no offense. So I had a couple of people in the chat say they do. So, I mean, I just think that's this idea of turning it on its head, like you're saying,
Yeah.
Justin, like,
It,
is that really should we be paying
yeah.
attention? Sorry, Greg.
It's becoming the merit just kind of becomes a bit of a PR exercise, right? It's a time for us to talk about comp and what we do to stay competitive in the market. And hey, everybody gets an adjustment at once a year, so nobody's left out. And like you said, if you go through the entire year and you add up all those mints and promotions and stuff, we're probably spending another % or two of the payroll in addition to the merit. And that doesn't, we don't get credit for that, right? So we probably could do our job at getting credit for that.
Yeah.
But that also would highlight to a lot of employees that like, hey, other people got adjustments this year and I didn't. What do I got to do to get that? But we usually use merit as a way to say like, hey, look at our pay or rewards, look at all those things, because we can control that one time, that message. It's not just throughout the year. And if the news is bad, then we can have our talking points and say, here's all the reasons why it was bad, and we can control that message, right? If it's good, we can highlight it. So it gives us a chance to talk about pay once a year. So again, it just becomes a bit of a performance, a bit of compensation theater, if you will, to get out there and show what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's also that one size fits all approach that just doesn't work, because different populations and sectors of jobs need different ways to maintain their comp and reward that compensation. So let's step back and go, enough. Let's right size this for the organization. But we really have to collaborate with those leaders and get our leaders up to speed on what that means for them.
Yeah, I think about the more recent projects, the emphasis is, okay, we figured out what we're going to do. This is our pay mix. This is our strategy. How are we going to talk about this? And that's becoming more and more of a conversation point in our projects, and that we've been holding the hand, of our clients to be able to have that conversation, because I think that, Greg, to your point, it probably does have to only be an annual conversation. You can put it in, but at the end of the day, you can't be constantly talking about comp, right? And because you have benefits conversations, you have other things that are happening in the organization. So making sure that you're at the ready and people are getting it, so it just becomes part of the kind of the ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you've got there's a follow-up question. Yeah.
Stacy, I like that question, Stacy. Right. I guess one of my thoughts and what I've seen be successful at some organizations is this idea of a quarterly check-in and having but making it about career. So making it about, let's look at how you're doing, employee, let's have a conversation about how is the year going? How are you progressing it around certain things? Like, it's just a fuller. So Stacy, to your point, it's not just about pay, it's pay related, but it's about your career.
Yeah.
and engaging with the employee around development, around performance, um, making that more of the conversation, less about the sort of the pay transaction. You know,
Yeah.
that may be an outcome of career, but it's that fuller conversation. And I think to your point, then, Jen, it becomes about talking, right, like being able to better explain then the comp aspects of things, like how you
Mhm.
get more money and that
Mhm.
pay explainability component.
And for one client, I know we developed a one pager, no numbers, but concepts, right? They got hired. This is what they had. And then every annual or conversation with employees, reminder, this is how we haven't made any changes, but this is how it works, or that we've adapted this. But then also, I think the question of who also has those bigger conversation. I mean, I've seen it mostly be the HR department that leads it with the CEO or the executive team. Like that is where the message is coming from, and everybody's on the same page, and then it starts getting trickled down.
Yeah, I think it's got to be it's about the employee value proposition, right? And I think that's where it makes sense. You have a whole communication strategy that's around all of that. So compensate, pay is part of that, but it's part of this much bigger story about how we value you. And then, like you said, you have different sort of levels of communication. So you have the broader one done by the leaders, but then it's reinforced on those one-on-ones with the manager and employee.
Because at the end of the day, everybody, in particular employees, want to just know how how do I, how does this impact me? It's about me, and as you move up, it becomes broader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I did a project with a firm that had they had eliminated performance reviews entirely and were just doing, across the board adjustments. And the employees asked to have performance reviews brought back. Why? You think they hate performance reviews? No, they need the feedback. They want to understand what they're doing right. Nobody gets out of bed first thing in the morning and says, "I'm going to go mess things up at work today." Nobody does. Everybody thinks they're doing their best, and without guidance, and that's what. And if we're talking about merit, it ties right back.
Yeah, the high performers, they get really irritated by the across the board, right? I mean, I hear those that are like, "This is not great. You're giving everybody the same, and I'm a top performer, and I'm not getting any more." So they're upset. The people who come to you and go, "Well, why don't we just get a cost of living adjustment?" That's your lower performers, right? Like they're the ones that they're like, hey, can I get the cost of living across the mint? Because they just want it guaranteed. So it's interesting when you take that out, people get upset because they don't necessarily want it all across the board.
Yeah, and I wonder too if that's where I think that's where merit does fall short, because at a certain point, 3% versus 4%, it's the percent that you got that's more satisfying than the actual dollars, because really 3% and 4% is not a huge difference. But I wonder if that's where the real impact and where you have that motivational kind of delivery is through the variable pay components, where you could leverage like short-term incentive instead of the merit increases. So I'm not actually opposed to across the board increases if the performance is recognized through some vehicles, whether it's, I think probably one of the best is your short-term incentive programs, whether they're quarterly or annual.
Yeah. And I do think you're right, Justin, in that some people, there's a certain, I got an A and you got a B kind of a thing. The 4 versus 3%, might resonate with some people, but I hope that's not true. But I do think there are some people that are wired that way, and that the dollar amount isn't as important to them as which of the buckets they got placed in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, the big increases are coming from people that were already low in the range, or maybe a promotion is the better opportunity or the better movement for them. So, merit, a lot of times I think when it's a big increase, it's correcting something that was already wrong to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's be smarter about how we're spending our limited budgets.
So then the question is, right, we're all talking about all talking about these alternatives. who's going to go first, right? Because we talked about, it's pretty standard. It's fruitcake. Everybody's got it. Nobody likes it. But, which can go, yeah, we're not doing that because it's a risk, right? I mean, people are kind of wired to know now that that's what we do. So the challenge is, how do you move away from it?
Yeah.
And that's a really great point, Greg, because this client that I'm working with right now that has committed to not doing, not tying performance to pay, at least base pay, they're really struggling with the perception within the community that's impacting the community. People are calling them and talking, what are you talking about? Why are you doing this? It's going to, we each organization sits within the United States of America, and it's the, individual, rah, pull them up by the bootstraps. That's the mentality that we're all steeped in. And if we start messing with that, it's really challenging to people to think about things in a different way. It's always been this way. This has always been part of our culture. And if we shift, why and who is going to go first? It's a great question. I love it.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sherry.
just a quick one. So, but let's not forget about the opportunity that we have here with pay transparency and pay equity.
Yes.
Yep. That's the part where, again, we've got permission to kind of mix up the way that we're doing things. So
I agree, Sherry. I mean, I think, and so I have seen it in the past, pre-transparency. I worked with a large global organization. I think they had about 18,000 employees around the world. They did away with performance increases or merit increases. They did go to the adjustments. They were a heavily technical engineering population. And I think it was something they saw it as a welcome thing. That's right. We know performance is gooey, and it's fraught with issues. We would much prefer just knowing that we'll be adjusted accordingly, what makes sense. That was something they could wrap their heads around. And I think, Shari, to your point, pay transparency is going to sort of force that issue. And I think it'll be a transition, Greg, but I think it'll be, as ranges get more narrow and everybody is better understanding how pay is set, I think there will be then room to say maybe these nuances that we're trying to bake in just aren't really working. If we correct, like Catherine was saying, it's an annuity, right? It's a compounding over time. If we start to make those corrections and start to bring people kind of closer together toward the ideal rate for their jobs, then I think it gives us the opportunity to potentially have some savings, or, like you're saying, Shari, reallocate that budget and then put more in, like you're saying, Justin, to cash rewards, short-term incentives that are centered on specific behaviors, or like somebody had in the chat, a profit sharing programs, but building out sort of, again, making some of those distinctions between your client facing, I can easily measure performance based on these things. You're more of an operational function. You're keeping the lights on. So we're going to, pay your short-term incentive based on the achievement of our company goals, some of these revenue targets, things like that. And I think we're going to see that opportunity to play out.
Yeah, I mean, because merit is a future-facing payout,
Right.
and STIs are for past performance. I mean,
Exactly.
I agree. So I think there's opportunity. I feel like for us, and Shari, I want to pick up on kind of your like empowering the total rewards, the comp professional, right? I do think there's an opportunity for us to be bold. And as you said, we have permission with pay transparency. So let's put forth a lot of the things I am confident all of us have advised people about over the years. And, like you were saying at the top of the hour, Justin, don't do the peanut butter, differentiate performance. But maybe we can say to them, instead of the fruitcake, merit matrix, here, I have this wonderful short-term incentive that I can offer you. Let's do that instead. If you're talking about pay, I'm going to keep it really simple. Base pay is based on market, and this is how we define it, and internal valuation, and this is how we define it. That's it. That's all it's been on. I think there's an opportunity for us to to empower leaders and empower managers to have better conversations with employees and to educate employees as well.
Yeah, I think leaning into the STI is going to be really key here.
Yeah, it is interesting. I ran a poll, probably I think it was about 2 weeks ago, asking what's the better tool for actually retaining top performers, and we had about 550 comp professionals that responded to it, and 58% still believe it's salary adjustments. Only 27% believe that the most effective tool in retaining your top performers are those short-term incentive plans. So it'll be interesting to see, if anyone who will go first and how that works out.
Yeah, but I have to say, with regard to compensation, being the cutting edge person is pretty darn risky, right? It's not the thing you want to get wrong, because you mess it up. And comp, I always say, has a nuclear half-life, right? If it gets messed up, you will have people who never even worked at the company when that problem happened, and they'll be talking about it 15, 20 years later, and they weren't even there at the time. But it's crazy. We really have to be careful about how we communicate and what we put in. We need to have the long-term perspective. And I think a lot of us, we work somewhere 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years, and we forget that what we really should be focused on is what's in the best interest of the organization over decades.
Good change management.
Catherine, that's something that's super, when you say, thinking about it for decades, you have taking that step back of, we just came out of one of the most disruptive periods in the world and in comp, right? We were chasing our tail. I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, people, asking what are people doing with pay? I'm like, I have a dartboard. I really don't know. Right. And I think we're finally kind of slowing down and kind of getting regrounded. And, that's also the argument for having a good system, so you can weather that storm a little bit better. How strong is your ship? So I think, some ways, going to your boat analogy, Sherry, we're kind of starting to look at our ship and saying, do we have the right ship? What do we need to tweak? Let's get it a little bit more solid, so when we hit headwinds and hit rocky, waters, we can weather that storm better than what we did a couple, years ago.
Jennifer, I think that's so great. It's so insightful, right? It is about workforce resilience, and how do we ensure that? How do we create and engage a workforce in a manner that we know it can weather some of these different headwinds, the shifts of the organization, the shifts in the business. And I think the good news is we're seeing at the executive levels, right, much more interest. The board is asking questions about what it is that you're doing from, in terms of human capital management. And the total rewards professional owns so much of that, because they're asking about pay equity, they're asking about pay gap, they're asking about all of these things that are pay related, in the sense that pay becomes a perfect thing to measure talent management against, right? So you have these opportunities to engage leadership in a new way, I think, especially at the comp committee level, right? And to talk about driving forth the things that you're saying, Jennifer. So I think in that way too, there's an opportunity, I think, for comp professionals to start driving the conversation and say, this is what we used to do, but this is really where we should be headed based on all of these different factors. And here, hear me out. Like, here's how we can maybe reallocate those funds and manage people in a better way.
And I think too, those are great, excellent points, great insights. And it brought to mind the fact that pay is just one of the deal elements that employees use when they're looking for work, right? So we're looking at culture, we're looking at, do I have to work with jerks all day long? What's my work environment like? Do we have enough staff? All those components come into play, right? And so as we're training managers, it is important to remind them that all those pieces need to fit together.
Such a great conversation. I think it's really interesting. I think we're going to see a lot of things continuing to change. I mean, it's one of those conversations and topics I think that is an evergreen conversation where it's always changing, but it's the core of it hasn't changed in a long time overall. So it'll be interesting to see if it does in the next couple of years, what the new laws and regulations and the globalization of compensation, what that do to your merit increases, as well as technology. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting changes that happen there. And so we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So we're kind of running towards the end of this pay practitioners panel. So what I'd like to do is just kind of, once again, just give a big thank you to the practitioners here. So Nancy, Sherry, Catherine, Greg, Jennifer, and also say thanks to Jaime, who couldn't join us today. But this has been just I feel so grateful and so appreciative to have you all join and, spend the last 8 weeks or last 16 weeks and 8 sessions talking about all things comp. It's been a lot of fun. And, I think I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from folks that, everyone that we bring on is so well grounded in compensation, so knowledgeable and pragmatic that I think it's been a really fantastic event and season this end of year. So thank you guys again so much for joining. And if you like what you see, please feel free to reach out to any of the folks on here. They'd be more than happy to talk to you. And,
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah.
Thank you guys. And
Really fun.
we will hopefully see everybody again next year.
All right.
I'll miss these conversations. It's been a blast.
I will too. I know. It's so much fun. Thanks
right.
again.
Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks.
Everybody.
Bye.